One day, the white men arrived. The Portuguese came dressed in strange clothing, with faces that looked like no one in the villages had ever seen. They brought with them items that sparkled and glimmered, objects the villagers had never imagined could exist. "Look at the beauty of their cloth," one villager murmured, "and see how their metals shine, like stars in the night sky," another marveled. The Portuguese came with friendliness, acting as traders and merchants, eager to exchange their goods for gold and other treasures the land held in abundance. Bediako watched all of this with worry etched into his face. He knew that beauty could hide a beast, that kindness could cover deception. He approached the king one evening, his voice filled with urgency. "Nana," he began, bowing his head respectfully. "These white men, they do not come with only trade in their hearts. I see something deeper, something darker. They are like the ant that crawls into the calabash, never to leave." But the king was unmoved. He looked at Bediako with a frown. "Okomfo," he said sternly, "they have brought us fine things. Look at the cloth, the metals, the wines they offer. What harm is there in exchange? After all, they leave as soon as their boats are full." Bediako shook his head slowly, his heart heavy. "Nana, gold does not fear rust, but that does not mean it should be left out in the rain. I beg of you, heed my warning. These people are like the rain that begins gently, but soon it sweeps away everything in its path." But the people did not want to hear of it. Some even murmured among themselves, saying Bediako was jealous of the wealth the Portuguese brought. "He talks too much," one man whispered to another. "He thinks he knows everything," a woman scoffed. The priest's warnings grew louder, his voice carrying through the villages like a drumbeat. "Mark my words, they come with friendly faces, but soon they will bring chains, and we will lose more than we can ever gain." Yet, each time he spoke, he was met with anger and frustration. One day, in desperation, Bediako stood at the edge of the village and shouted to the people gathered there, "You cannot hide the truth under a stone forever. When a stranger sits too long in your house, he begins to eye your treasures. Do not let them make our land their home." The crowd erupted. "Enough!" someone yelled. The king's advisers were already whispering to him, plotting to silence Bediako once and for all. "He is spreading fear," they said. "If we do not act, the people will think us weak." The gods, in their infinite wisdom, whispered to Bediako in a dream one night. He saw himself standing in the company of his ancestors, the mighty spirits who had walked the earth before him, guardians of the land and its people. They warned him that his time was near, that his words of truth had sown seeds of enmity among men, blinded by wealth and false promises. The gods spoke plainly. His life was soon to be claimed by those who saw him as a threat. But there was more. His journey was not over. The gods had entrusted him with one last task, one final message that would shape the future. With reverence he bowed before the ancestors, in his vision accepting his fate. "Let the will of the gods be done on earth," he murmured upon waking. The morning sun cast a golden light on his humble hut, filling him with a calm resolve. He knew what he had to do. Guided by the words of the gods, Bediako traveled to a nearby village where a hunter named Mr. Bravery lived with his wife. The couple had been married for years, yet they had no children. Mr. Bravery was known far and wide as a skilled hunter, a man who respected the land and the spirits, but his heart ached for an heir. When Bediako arrived at Mr. Bravery's doorstep, the hunter welcomed him with great respect. Okomfo, what brings you to my humble abode? Brewu asked, a flicker of hope sparking in his eyes. He knew the priest did not visit without purpose. Brewu, Okomfo Bediako began solemnly, the gods have revealed something to me, something that concerns you and the future of our people. The spirits have told me that your wife shall bear a son, but this will not be an ordinary child. He will be a warrior, a savior, born to protect our land from the hands of those who seek to enslave us. Mr. Brewu's eyes widened, and his wife covered her mouth in disbelief. For so long they had prayed for a child, and now Okomfo Bediako continued. The revered priest was telling them they would have one, and that this child would be destined for greatness. But, Okomfo Bediako continued, there is a ritual that must be performed to ensure the child's destiny is fulfilled. You must gather certain items, the skin of a potto, a lion's pelt, the skin of a chameleon, and a single strand of hair from a dwarf. In those days, hunters often possessed rare and mystical items, symbols of their prowess and connection to the spiritual world. Mr. Brewu nodded in understanding, promising to gather these items without delay. He saw the seriousness in Okomfo Bediako's eyes, and knew that this was not just a request, but a divine command. When the items were gathered, Okomfo Bediako performed a sacred ritual. He chanted ancient words that echoed through the village, a call to the ancestors and the spirits to bless this child yet to be born. The skins and the hair were burned in a small fire, their smoke curling upwards like a bridge between the earth and the heavens. As the ritual came to an end, he scooped some of the ashes and placed them in a small clay pot, handing it to Mr. Brewu. Listen to me carefully, Brewu, Okomfo Bediako said, his tone grave. When the child is born, you must bathe him in these ashes. This will protect him, connect him to the spirits, and prepare him for the battles he will one day face. But there are rules you must follow. Never, and I mean never, let this boy eat grass-cutter meat. It will sever his bond with the spirits and weaken his powers. And you must never cut his hair. His hair is a symbol of his strength and his destiny. And one last thing, he should never trust the king. Mr. Brewu and his wife nodded, their faces reflecting a mixture of hope and awe. They understood the weight of this prophecy, the responsibility now placed upon them. They would nurture this child and follow every instruction, no matter how unusual. Before leaving, Okomfo Bediako spoke one last time. When the child is born, name him Bediako, which means the brave warrior. He will live up to his name and save our people from those who come to enslave us. Though I may not be there to see him grow, my spirit will watch over him. Just days after his visit to Mr. Brewu's home, Okomfo Bediako received a message from the palace. The king, Nana Koduah, and the elders had summoned him. They invited him with words of honor and respect, but Okomfo Bediako sensed the heaviness in the air. He knew that their smiles hid sharp teeth, that their words held venom, and that the spirits had prepared him for this moment. When he arrived at the palace, the courtyard was filled with people, all eager to catch a glimpse of the powerful priest. The king and elders welcomed him with warmth and smiles that felt like the sun on a stormy day, bright yet fleeting, covering only darkness beneath. "Okomfo Bediako," Nana Koduah greeted him, his voice filled with forced cheer. "The wise one, the seer, the one who hears the whispers of the gods, we welcome you." Bediako nodded respectfully. "Nana," he replied, his gaze steady, unflinching. He knew what lay beneath their pleasantries, but he felt no fear. The king leaned forward, his eyes narrowed with feigned curiosity. "Tell me, Okomfo," he began, "have the gods revealed anything to you about our kingdom's future? Is there a message we should hear?" Okomfo Bediako took a deep breath. He looked around the room, his eyes meeting those of the elders, each one quickly averting their gaze, as if his stare burned like fire. He answered, his voice calm but laced with an undeniable power. "Yes, Nana, the gods have spoken." "And what did they say?" the king asked, his smile faltering just slightly. Bediako's gaze turned distant, as if he was seeing beyond the walls of the palace, into a future only he could glimpse. "The gods said, truth will soon be killed and lies will rule, but one day truth will be reborn and rise again to defeat lies." The words hung in the air like a spell. The king and elders shifted uncomfortably, knowing full well the plans they had devised. Bediako's words were a mirror reflecting their hidden intentions. Some elders looked down, while others clenched their fists, the weight of guilt pressing upon them. The king's smile returned, sharper than before. "Okomfo, you speak in parables as always," he said, feigning amusement, "but let us share a drink as a symbol of our unity. I, myself, will serve you." Nana Koduah poured palm wine into a cup, his hand steady, his face a mask. He handed it to Bediako, who took the cup with a gentle smile, his eyes never leaving the king's. "Nana," Bediako spoke, holding the cup carefully, "I know what you have given me. I know the path you wish for me to take. But if this is my fate, then I accept it." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. "I could turn this wine into water, for the gods have granted me that power. But to flee from my destiny would bring shame to them. And so, if the king desires my death, I will drink it gladly." The king's expression wavered. He looked away, but Bediako's gaze remained fixed, his face serene. Bediako raised the cup to his lips. "But remember this," he said, his voice echoing through the silent room. "One day, the white men you trust so blindly will tear this kingdom apart. They will turn us into strangers in our own land." With that he drank deeply, his hand steady, his spirit calm. The room held its breath as he lowered the cup, his eyes meeting the king's one last time. For a moment, it was as if time itself had stopped. Then, like a great tree felled by a single stroke, Bediako swayed and collapsed to the ground, the life fading from his eyes. The air was thick with shock, disbelief mingling with guilt among those who had plotted his end. As they watched him lying there, lifeless, some of the elders felt a strange heaviness in their hearts, a realization that they had silenced a voice of truth. A good thing is like a sleeping treasure, and they had buried theirs. In his death, Okomfo Bediako left behind not just a prophecy, but a warning, one that would echo through generations. The people of the kingdom would remember him, the priest who dared to speak the truth, even when it cost him his life. And one day, when the kingdom finally fell under the chains of foreign rule, they would realize that Bediako had seen it all coming, that his words had not been in vain. The king announced to the people that Bediako is dead, and it was a natural death. The people wept and mourned his death. 6 months later, there was a tribal war among the kingdoms, and Nana was being defeated. But there was a hope. The Portuguese visited them and offered them a support. They told them they can help them win the battle against the other tribes. They offered them guns, weapons, and trained their warriors on how to shoot within. Some few days they had become perfect in their skills. The Nana Koduah engage in the battlefield with this sophisticated weapons, which was new to the other opponents. They defeated them massively and enslaved their warriors. As usual, those days such form of slavery was called domestic slavery. There came the Portuguese. They visited the king and informed him that since they helped them win the battle, they should hand over the slaves to them, and even with that, they would buy them. Nana Koduah didn't hesitate and released the slaves to the Europeans. From their chartered slavery emerged. Years passed, and the village knew the quiet, unassuming hunter, Mr. Brewu, and his son, Bediako. At 18, Bediako had grown into a powerful young man, just as Okomfo Bediatuo had prophesied. His thick dreadlocks cascaded down his back, and his gaze held a fierce determination that hinted at a strength far beyond his years. Bediako's strength became legendary in the village, and everyone who crossed his path spoke of it in awe. He had a kind heart, but possessed an unmatched power, a rare combination that drew respect from all. There were 3 moments that cemented his reputation as an extraordinary young man, a true embodiment of the warrior spirit that Okomfo Bediatuo had foreseen. The first display of Bediako's strength and bravery came one fateful afternoon when 5 young children, playing along the banks of a deep river, slipped and fell into the swift, swirling waters. The river was known to be dangerous, with a powerful current that could easily overpower even the most experienced swimmers. Panic gripped the village as word spread, and families gathered along the riverbank, their hearts pounding with fear and helplessness. Without a second thought, Bediako plunged into the water, his strong arms cutting through the waves with ease. One by one, he reached each child, pulling them to the surface and swimming them safely to the shore. The river's powerful current tugged at him, but Bediako's determination was unwavering. Even as his muscles strained, he fought against the water's pull, his focus solely on saving each child. The villagers watched in awe as he dived back in again and again, never once faltering, his strength and endurance seeming endless. By the time he had brought the 5th child safely to shore, Bediako was exhausted but unharmed. His eyes filled with relief as he saw the children reunited with their tearful families. That day, his bravery and strength became the talk of the village, and everyone knew they were witnessing something truly extraordinary. The second moment that showcased Bediako's strength came during a flood season. Heavy rains had swollen the riverbanks, threatening to sweep away the crops that the village relied on. When Bediako saw the waters rising, he didn't wait for anyone's help. With his bare hands, he lifted large stones and placed them along the banks, reinforcing the edges to slow the river's advance. It was grueling work, but he continued tirelessly until the threat was averted. The elders watched him with admiration, whispering, "Obiaranim obrempong ashase." No one knows the beginning of a great man. They knew that his strength was not only in his muscles, but in his heart, as he worked to protect his people. The third, and perhaps most unforgettable show of Bediako's power, occurred when a tree struck by lightning fell across the village's main pathway, blocking passage to the forest and cutting off access to their hunting grounds. The tree was massive, and none of the villagers could even imagine moving it. Bediako, however, stood before the fallen tree, examining it calmly. Then, with a mighty push, he began to lift the trunk, his muscles taut with the effort. Slowly, inch by inch, he lifted the tree and dragged it aside, clearing the path as villagers looked on in awe. Word of Bediako's strength spread, and many began to believe that he was more than just a strong young man. He was the embodiment of the ancestors' strength, the warrior that Okomfo Bediatuo had foretold. These moments were just the beginning, but they were enough to solidify Bediako's place as a hero among his people. Nana Koduah's hunger for wealth had transformed him into a tyrant, driven by greed and the promises of riches from his European allies. He no longer fought wars for honor or defense. He waged battles purely to capture warriors, women, and even children, all to sell them as slaves to the Europeans. The more he profited, the less he cared about the suffering he caused. His own people began to fear him, but they dared not speak against their king. Bediako watched these events with a growing sense of unease and anger. He could no longer stand by while his people's honor was trampled and innocent lives were bartered away like mere commodities. Though he was young, his heart was filled with courage and a deep-seated sense of justice. He knew he had to put an end to Nana Koduah's tyranny, even if it meant standing alone. One day, word spread that Nana Koduah's warriors were returning from yet another battle, marching back with captives chained and forced to walk behind them. Among the captives were not only enemy warriors, but also innocent men, women, and children. Lives reduced to mere items of trade. Bediako felt his heart harden with resolve. As the warriors moved through the dense forest path, Bediako appeared before them, standing tall and fearless, blocking their way. His presence was commanding, and even the king's warriors, armed and battle-hardened, felt a shiver run down their spines. They had heard rumors of Bediako's strength, of the power he wielded, and now here he was, standing alone, challenging an entire battalion. "Release them!" Bediako commanded, his voice echoing through the trees. His words were firm, unwavering. The captives looked up in hope, sensing that this young man might be their salvation. The warriors bristled at the challenge, tightening their grip on their weapons. One of them sneered, stepping forward. "And who are you to command us, boy?" he spat, attempting to intimidate Bediako. Bediako met his gaze with unflinching calm. He drew a line in the dirt before him with the tip of his sword and spoke with a quiet intensity. "I am warning you. Do not cross this line. Release the captives and go. This is your final chance." The warriors exchanged glances, smirking at the thought of a single man challenging them all. Feeling confident, they stepped forward one by one, crossing the line as they moved closer, ready to strike. Bediako watched them, his face calm, his stance unbreakable. In one swift motion, he reached for his bow, loading 5 arrows with a single hand. He was a master of archery, trained to fire multiple arrows with deadly accuracy. As the warriors crossed the line, he released the arrows, each one finding its mark. The arrows pierced through the feet of 5 warriors, pinning them to the ground. Cries of pain filled the air, halting the advance of the remaining warriors. A fierce battle erupted in the heart of the forest. Bediako moved like a shadow, his speed unmatched, his strength overpowering. He struck down his opponents with the ferocity of a lion, each swing of his sword cutting through the ranks of his enemies. His movements were fluid, almost supernatural, as he leaped over his attackers, evading their blows and striking with deadly precision. He cut through the enemy ranks, his sword flashing like lightning, his strength like a thunderstorm unleashed. The warriors, once confident in their numbers, now felt fear. They had heard tales of Bediako's power, but witnessing it was something else entirely. He seemed to vanish and reappear in the midst of them, striking from unexpected angles, using his fists with a force that felt like a giant's. He struck hard, his fists like hammers, his movements so swift that they seemed almost otherworldly, like a dwarf disappearing and reappearing in the thick of battle. With each warrior he defeated, he grew stronger, more determined. his spirit fueled by the injustice he sought to end. One by one, Nana Koduah's men fell, unable to match his strength, his agility, or his righteous fury. At last, when the ground lay littered with the bodies of the king's warriors, Bediako stood alone, breathing heavily but victorious. He turned to the captives, their eyes wide with awe and gratitude. Gently he began to release them from their chains, his hands working swiftly to set them free. "Go," he told them, his voice soft but urgent. "Return to your homes. Tell no one what you have seen here. This is your second chance at freedom. Make the most of it." The freed captives, still trembling from the ordeal, nodded and hurried away, casting one last look at their savior before disappearing into the forest. They would remember Bediako as a spirit of justice, a warrior whose heart beat for his people, a hero who had dared to stand against a king blinded by greed. As the forest grew silent again, Bediako stood alone, the weight of his actions settling on his shoulders. He knew this was only the beginning. Nana Koduah would not let this defiance go unanswered, but Bediako was ready, his heart resolute, his spirit unbreakable. He had seen the suffering of his people, and he would not rest until he had freed them from the chains of oppression, no matter what it cost him. Nana Koduah waited eagerly in his palace, surrounded by European traders who had come to purchase the captives his warriors were bringing back. He had promised them strong men and women, and the Europeans had arrived prepared, their ships anchored nearby, ready to load their human cargo. They waited patiently for days, but no news came. As each day passed without word, Nana Koduah grew anxious. The Europeans' patience was wearing thin, and whispers of their frustration reached his ears. Eventually, unable to bear the silence any longer, Nana Koduah sent a group of messengers to track down his warriors and bring news of their progress. The messengers set off swiftly, following the familiar path through the dense forest. They journeyed for hours, but as they approached the area where the warriors should have been, an eerie silence filled the air, heavy and foreboding. Then, just ahead, they saw something that stopped them in their tracks. Bodies scattered across the ground. It was a horrific sight. Over 200 warriors lay lifeless, as if a fierce, untamed beast had torn through their ranks. The ground was soaked with blood, and the trees around them bore marks of intense struggle. The messengers, eyes wide with terror, struggled to comprehend what they were seeing. The warriors had been some of the strongest men in the kingdom, and yet they lay here, defeated, with wounds that seemed almost unreal. Who or what could have done this? And where were the captives? The messengers, filled with dread, hurried back to the palace, their hearts pounding with fear. They reached Nana Koduah and fell to their knees before him, their faces pale as they recounted what they had seen. "Nana," one of them stammered, his voice trembling. "The warriors, all of them, they are dead. It was like nothing we have ever seen. Their bodies are scattered, as if they were struck down by a force not of this world. And the captives, they are gone, vanished." Nana Koduah stared at the messenger in disbelief. His mouth opened and closed, struggling to find words. "Impossible!" he thundered. "Over 200 warriors! How could this happen? You must be mistaken." The messengers shook their heads, their eyes wide with the horror of what they had witnessed. "Nana, we saw it with our own eyes. The forest path is littered with their bodies. It was as if a monster had swept through them." As the news sank in, the Europeans, who had overheard the exchange, grew increasingly furious. They had invested resources, expecting a large number of captives to be sold to them. One of them, a tall, stern-faced man with cold eyes, stepped forward, his voice laced with anger. "Nana Koduah," he said sharply, "we came here under the assurance that you would deliver the captives to us. We waited patiently, and now we hear your men have been defeated, and our cargo is gone. This is unacceptable." The king, caught between shock and fear, turned to the European trader, his voice faltering. I did not foresee this. I do not know who or what could have done this." The European's eyes narrowed, his anger palpable. "You promised us slaves, Nana, and if you cannot deliver them, it will cost you dearly. You must act, and you must do so swiftly. Find out who is responsible, or you will find yourself without our support." Nana Koduah felt a cold sweat trickling down his spine. The partnership with the Europeans had brought him wealth and power, but now, under the weight of their demands, he felt trapped. The Europeans were ruthless in their pursuit of profit, and he knew they would not hesitate to sever ties with him if he failed to deliver. Summoning his closest advisors, Nana Koduah ordered them to investigate the massacre. He demanded answers, desperate to understand how his powerful warriors could have been defeated so decisively, and who had taken the captives. As days passed, the mystery only deepened. Rumors began to circulate among the villagers. Some whispered that it was the work of a vengeful spirit, a force sent by the ancestors to punish Nana Koduah for his greed. Others murmured that a warrior of unimaginable strength had appeared, someone who could not be defeated by mere men. The name Bediako began to surface in hushed conversations, the villagers piecing together hints and sightings. Nana Koduah, hearing these whispers, dismissed them at first, unwilling to believe that a single man could have caused such devastation. But as the pressure from the Europeans mounted, he realized he could no longer ignore the possibility. The idea of a lone warrior, someone powerful enough to challenge his authority and disrupt his lucrative trade, filled him with both anger and fear. Determined to get to the bottom of this, Nana Koduah sent more scouts, promising rewards for anyone who could bring him information on the mysterious warrior who had dared to stand against him. The Europeans watched him closely, their patience thin as a blade's edge. And in the shadows, Bediako remained hidden, watching and waiting. He had struck his blow against the king's tyranny, but he knew this was only the beginning. The battle to free his people from the chains of greed and oppression was far from over, and he prepared himself for whatever would come next. Nana Koduah, desperate to uncover the identity of the mysterious warrior who had brought devastation upon his forces, sent spies to a rival village. Word had spread throughout the land of a young man named Bediako, whose strength and skill were unmatched, rumored to be the lone hand behind the massacre of the king's warriors. When Nana Koduah's spies returned, their faces were pale with disbelief as they relayed what they had learned. The king was stunned. How could one man possibly overcome more than 200 of his finest warriors? Determined to bring this defiant warrior to justice, Nana Koduah ordered his soldiers to find and capture Bediako. But on that day, Bediako had gone to the farm, and his father was deep in the forest on a hunting expedition. Finding no sign of Bediako, the soldiers turned their attention to his mother, capturing her to use as bait. They dragged her from her home, ignoring her cries, determined to lure Bediako into their trap. When Bediako returned from the farm, he found their home empty and signs of a struggle scattered throughout. His heart pounded as he realized what had happened. Without a moment's hesitation, he seized his bow and arrows, grabbed his sword, and set off with the speed and fury of a storm. He ran through the forest like a horse in full gallop, his mind fixed on his mission, his heart burning with anger and determination. He could feel the weight of his mother's life pressing upon him, but he was resolute, knowing he had to save her. As he traced the warrior's path through the thick forest, he finally saw them up ahead. They held his mother in chains, her face bruised yet strong, her spirit unbroken. Bediako stepped into view, his presence alone halting the warriors in their tracks. His gaze was fierce, and his grip on his weapons tightened as he locked eyes with the soldiers. The soldiers raised their spears defensively, aware that they stood before a force they barely understood. One of the warriors sneered, trying to mask his fear. "Bediako," he called out, "if you value your mother's life, you will surrender. Come quietly, and we will take you to the king. Resist, and she will pay the price." Bediako's mother, bound yet defiant, looked into her son's eyes. Her voice was calm but filled with urgency. "Bediako," she whispered, "remember the prophecy. You were not born to save me. You were born to save our people, to protect this land. My life is not the one you must safeguard. Your destiny is greater than any one of us." Bediako's sass wavered, torn between his love for his mother and his duty to the kingdom. He knew the truth of her words, but the sight of her, bound and vulnerable, pierced his soul. He was left with a choice no warrior should ever have to face: to surrender for the safety of the woman who had given him life, or to fight for the fate of an entire kingdom, knowing it could mean losing her forever. As we close this chapter, we leave Bediako at the crossroads of fate, a choice before him that will shape not only his future, but the future of all who depend on him. What would you do if you had to choose between the life of someone you love and the destiny of a nation? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to Anansi Web of Tales for more captivating African adventure stories, moral lessons, and tales of love and bravery. Let us know where you're watching from, and join us as we await the next chapter in Bediako's journey. One day, the white men you trust so blindly will tear this kingdom apart. They will turn us into strangers in our own land,